There's a kind of math that doesn't show up in any textbook. The math of a promise. You make one, and it sits there, quiet, sometimes for decades, gathering interest you never agreed to pay. And then one ordinary morning the bill comes due, and you find out exactly what kind of man you are by whether or not you reach for your wallet. For a 68-year-old motorcycle mechanic named Wade Coleman, that bill arrived on a Tuesday in March, carried through the door of his garage by a 79-year-old widow holding $40 and a dream that should have died in the sand 28 years ago. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand why that widow mattered, why those $40 would end up putting 2 judges and a doctor and a real estate lawyer behind bars, you have to understand what happened the next day. You have to picture 97 motorcycles surrounding a federal courthouse in Sacramento in the pouring rain. The engines screaming loud enough to rattle windows 3 blocks away. An old woman standing in the middle of all of it, holding a battered tin box like it contained the answer to every question that ever mattered. And one aging biker forced to decide whether keeping a dead man's promise was worth spending the rest of his life in prison. So stay with me. Because this story goes places you won't see coming, and the letter at the center of it, the one that sat sealed for 33 years, is going to break your heart wide open before we're done. Hit subscribe right now, because I promise you do not want to miss how this ends. Let's go back to the garage. It sat on the rough edge of a town in Northern California, the kind of place where the pavement just sort of gives up and lets the dust win. Wade Coleman had owned it for 15 years, ever since he finally stopped pretending he was cut out for anything in this life except engines, asphalt, and the long ribbon of road that connects them. 5 in the morning. Every single morning. The same routine he'd kept for 45 years, ever since he'd patched onto the club at 23. His hand found the chrome of his 1963 Harley Panhead before his eyes were even fully open. The bike sat dead center in the garage like an altar. And honestly, that's pretty much what it was. He'd bought it in 1976, 20 years old. Paid for it with money he'd broken his back earning at a lumber mill, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Back then his hair was black and thick, and his spine didn't file a complaint every time he stood up, and he believed freedom meant never having to answer to a single soul about anything. 45 years later, the hair had gone the color of brushed steel, and there wasn't much of it left. His back reminded him every morning that he was mortal and aging and running out of road. And somewhere in those 45 years, he'd learned that real freedom isn't about answering to nobody. Real freedom is something you earn by keeping your word, even when keeping it costs you everything you've got. On the workbench, next to a coffee cup that had gone cold around 2 in the morning, sat something that didn't belong in a motorcycle shop. A military dog tag, stainless steel, worn nearly smooth from decades of being carried in pockets and turned over between anxious fingers on the nights sleep wouldn't come. The name stamped into it read Earl Coleman, USMC, 1968 to 1991. His father, dead 33 years this coming February. Desert Storm, a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who'd promised to come home and teach his boy how to rebuild a carburetor the right way, how to read the wind on a long mountain run, how to be the kind of man who keeps his word when the whole world hands him reasons to break it. Earl Coleman never came home. And here's the part that had eaten at Wade for 33 years. His father had wanted him to enlist, to serve, to wear the uniform with honor the way 3 generations of Coleman men had done before him. But Wade had blown out 3 vertebrae in a motorcycle wreck at 18 and earned a permanent medical exemption. No uniform, no deployment, No way to walk in his father's boot prints and prove he was forged from the same steel. Just engines and asphalt and a guilt that had sat in his chest like a swallowed stone for 3 decades. He set the dog tag down with the reverence some men save for church, and he turned to look at the other bike in the garage. Another 1963 Panhead, identical to his own, except this one looked like it had given up on living. The tank rusted clean through in 3 places. The engine seized solid. Probably hadn't turned over in 10 years. The leather seat cracked and curled like it had been rained on for a season and then baked in the sun until every bit of life dried out of it. 2 weeks back, he'd run an ad in the local paper. Half a joke, half a monument to his own stubborn nostalgia. Harley Panhead, 1963, needs complete restoration. $40 or best offer. $40, because that's exactly what he'd paid for his first real toolbox in 1976, when he was young and broke, and absolutely certain he could fix anything in the world if he just had the right tools in his hands. $40, because it was a number that meant something to him, even if it meant nothing to anybody else alive. He never expected a single soul to actually show up and hand over cash for a bike that was more rust than metal. Who buys a motorcycle for $40? Turns out, a 79-year-old widow with steel in her spine and a secret she'd been carrying for 28 years. The taxi pulled up at exactly 11 that morning, kicking dust off the unpaved lot like a tiny desert storm. Wade was under a different bike, swapping a head gasket, when he heard the car door slam hard enough to echo off the walls. He slid out on his creeper, wiped his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth, and stepped into the hard California light. The woman climbing out of that cab was small, maybe 5'3" in sensible walking shoes. She wore a cream cardigan despite the heat already pushing 90, and she carried a purse that looked older than Wade's motorcycle. Her hair was white as fresh snow, pulled back in a neat bun. Her face had the kind of deep lines you only get from smiling too much and crying when nobody's watching, and living long enough to understand the difference between the two. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Blue as a high desert sky and sharp as broken glass. The eyes of someone who'd seen far too much and remembered every bit of it, and flat out refused to look away. She counted out bills for the driver with the careful precision of a person to whom every dollar mattered, then turned to face the garage. Her gaze went straight past Wade to the broken Panhead in the corner. That the one in the advertisement? Her voice was steady and clear, with an East Coast accent worn soft by decades out west but still living in the vowels. He nodded, suddenly feeling like he was the one being sized up. "Yes, ma'am. $40. She walked past him without waiting for an invitation, moving with the careful grace of somebody who'd learned to navigate the world in a body that no longer fully cooperated. She stopped in front of the wreck and stared at it like she was looking at a ghost. Or a gravestone. Or maybe both at once. "Ma'am," he started, "I appreciate you coming all the way out here, but I should be straight with you. That bike needs serious work." The engine seized. The tanks rusted through. The wirings shot. "It's not something you polish up and ride away on. My husband promised me a ride." Her voice cut clean through his explanation. Quiet, completely immovable. Route 66. All the way from Chicago to Los Angeles. 2,400 miles. She reached out and touched the rusted tank, tracing the Harley logo barely visible under decades of corrosion. He bought one just like this from an estate sale back in '89. Brought it home in a borrowed truck and spent 6 months rebuilding it in our garage. Said when he retired from the Marines, when he'd done his 20 and earned his pension, we'd take 2 weeks and just ride. No schedule, no destination but the road itself and each other. Her fingers stilled on the metal. He didn't retire. Desert Storm. February 1991. Lieutenant David Mercer, United States Marine Corps. He came home in a flag-draped box instead of on a motorcycle. They buried him with full honors while I stood there 8 months pregnant with our son, trying to understand how the world could just keep turning when mine had stopped completely. And Wade felt the air go right out of his lungs, like somebody had buried a fist in his gut. Desert Storm. February 1991. The exact same war. The exact same month that had taken his father and torn a hole in his life that 33 years hadn't managed to close. She turned to look at him, tears standing in those blue eyes that absolutely refused to fall. 28 years I've been waiting. 28 years too scared, too angry, too broken to even sit on a motorcycle. But I woke up 3 months ago on my 79th birthday, and I realized that if I don't do this now, I never will. And I'll have let him down one more time. So here I am, $40 and a dream that should have died in the desert but somehow didn't. She opened her purse and pulled out 2 crisp 20s, smooth like she'd gone to the bank specifically to get them new, and held them out with the dignity of a woman offering a king's ransom. But Wade wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at her hand. At the ring, a simple gold wedding band, worn thin by decades. But mounted on top of it was a Marine Corps ring, silver and gold, the eagle, globe, and anchor worn nearly smooth, and the inscription on the side, just catching the light, made his breath stop in his throat. Because he'd seen that inscription before. In a photograph his father had carried in his wallet through 2 deployments. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "That ring, where did it come from?" She glanced down, surprised, like she'd forgotten she was even wearing it. "My husband's. The Marines returned it with his personal effects. I've worn it every day since." She tilted it toward him. "Why?" He took it gently, the way you'd handle something irreplaceable, and read the words engraved inside the band. Bravo Company. The unit. The exact unit his father had served with in the last 3 years of his life. Wade's hand went to his back pocket on instinct, pure muscle memory, and pulled out the battered leather wallet he'd carried since the 80s. From the billfold he slid a photograph he'd carried for 33 years, creased and faded but still clear. 2 Marines in desert fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they owned the whole world and the world had agreed to the terms. On the back, in his father's tight handwriting, "Me and Merc, best Marine I ever served with." Kuwait, January 1991. Merc. Mercer. Lieutenant David Mercer. Wade looked up at the woman and saw his own shock staring back at him out of her face. "Your husband and my father," he said slowly. "They served together. Same company. Same deployment. They died in the same war. Probably the same week." She took the photograph with hands that shook harder now. David talked about him constantly. In every letter, said your father was the finest man he ever served with. Said Earl had saved his life twice already and would probably do it again before they made it home. Said if anything ever happened to him, Earl would take care of us. That Earl would keep the promise David couldn't. Something passed between them then that didn't need words. The recognition of a shared wound that had never healed and maybe never would. "But they both died," she whispered. February 10th, 1991, 4:17 in the morning, California time. The chaplain called. David and another Marine hit an unmarked minefield on a reconnaissance mission near the border. both killed. 4:17 a.m. Pacific Time. Wade had gotten the call about his father at 6:30 that same morning. 2 hours and 13 minutes later, his mother's scream had ripped him out of a dead sleep. "My father was the other Marine," he said quietly. "Gunnery Sergeant Earl Coleman. They died together." Her hand flew to her mouth. The photograph slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the concrete floor like a wounded bird. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was traffic somewhere far off and the tick of a cooling engine. She bent down, slow and careful, picked up the photo, and held it out to him with both hands like an offering. "Then you know," she said. "You know exactly what it's like to have someone promise you tomorrow, and have tomorrow stolen before you could even say goodbye." And right there, in that dusty garage, Wade Coleman made the kind of decision that changes the whole trajectory of a life. "The bike's worth $4,000, he said. "Maybe $5 if I put the work in." The 40 in the ad was a typo. I meant to write 4,000. Her face fell like a building coming down. She started folding the 20s back into her purse. "But," he said. And the word hung in the air. "I'm selling it to you for 40 anyway." Exactly like the ad said. On one condition. She went still. "I teach you to write it first, properly, 3 weeks of lessons, 2 hours every morning. You learn this machine like your life depends on it, because it will. Then, once you can ride without killing yourself, we fix it up together. You and me. Every bolt, every wire, every piece of chrome. And when it's finally ready, when it's worthy of the promise he made you, then you take that ride." Route 66. Every mile he wanted to give you. She stared at him like he'd started speaking ancient Greek. "Why would you do that?" "You don't know me. I'm a stranger who answered an ad." Wade looked down at his father's dog tag on the workbench. "Because my father and your husband made a promise to each other before they deployed. A blood promise. If one didn't come back, the survivor would take care of the other's family." He met her eyes. They both died. So neither of them could keep it. But I can. 33 years late. But I can still keep it. He held out his hand. Calloused, scarred, honest, deal. But here's where this stops being a sweet story about a widow and a motorcycle and turns into something else entirely. Because she didn't shake his hand. Not yet. She set her purse down on the workbench right beside his father's dog tag and pulled out a small tin box. Old military issue, the kind soldiers used to keep letters dry in the field. The lid scratched and dented from decades of being opened and closed. She lifted it with the reverence you'd give a sacred thing. Inside, 3 items arranged like a small altar. A purple heart in its original case, the ribbon still bright. A letter, yellowed and creased from being read 1,000 times. And a second letter, still sealed in its envelope, with words printed in careful block letters across the front, for the son of Earl Coleman. "If I don't make it home." Wade's heart slammed against his ribs. He reached for the sealed letter, but she gently pulled it back. "Not yet," she said. "First, I need your help with something. Something my husband asked me to do in his last letter. Something I've been too scared, too angry, too broken to do for 28 years. "What is it?" Her blue eyes locked onto his without a flicker. "My son is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. And there it is. The thing that nobody saw coming. Stay with me. He's got a doctor in the city who says I have Alzheimer's. Early stage, but progressing. He's got lawyers and paperwork and expert testimony, and a court date 10 days from now. He wants to put me in a home and take control of my assets under a conservatorship. Assets that include a 22-acre ranch worth $3 million that David left me. Land that's been in his family for 4 generations, going back to his great-grandfather who homesteaded it in 1887. Wade's jaw tightened. Do you have Alzheimer's? No. Rock solid. Absolutely certain. I can tell you what I had for breakfast every morning this month. I can recite David's service number. I can name every man in his platoon and tell you which ones came home and which didn't. I can remember the exact words he said to me the last time I saw him. I remember everything. Everything except how to stop my own son from robbing me blind. Her voice went hard as a blade. The diagnosis is fake. My son paid for it. $75,000 for a 30-minute exam and a report saying I have a disease I don't have. And if I can't prove it's fraud in 10 days, I lose the ranch, my freedom, the last thing David died to protect. Why would your son do this? Money. The word came out bitter as poison. He's a real estate attorney. Looks rich. Expensive suits, expensive car, an ex-wife who took half of everything. He's drowning in debt. And he's already signed a contract to sell my ranch to a development company that wants to build a luxury resort. 200 condos. But David's will is ironclad. The land can't be sold while I'm alive, unless I agree, or unless a court declares me incompetent. Her hands tightened on the tin box. I told him no. 2 months later, he showed up with a doctor and the diagnosis. Wade felt something cold and familiar settle into his chest, the exact feeling he used to get right before a bar fight broke out. The feeling you get when someone violates the code, because in his world, there were rules that mattered more than law. You didn't lie to your brothers. You didn't steal from your family. And under no circumstances did you ever betray the people who trusted you. You got proof the diagnosis is fake? Not yet. But I will. I just need time. 10 days. And someone who isn't scared of my son's lawyers or his money or his threats. Someone who understands that sometimes the right thing is the hard thing. The dangerous thing. Wade looked at that sealed letter in the box. The letter David Mercer had written 33 years ago, before he knew he was going to die. Before he knew Earl would die alongside him. A letter from a dead Marine to the son of his dead best friend. He held out his hand again. Deal, but we're going to need help. And when I say help, I mean the kind that makes lawyers nervous and judges pay attention. She took his hand. Her grip was stronger than he expected. What kind? Wade smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who'd spent 45 years learning exactly how to make powerful people deeply uncomfortable. The kind with motorcycles. Now, before we go any further, I need you to remember that detail. The kind with motorcycles. Because everything you just heard, the widow, the ranch, the fake diagnosis, all of it has been building to something. And the thing it's building to is going to involve 97 of them, in the rain, on a courthouse step. But we'll get there. First, the son shows up. His name was Royce Mercer, and he pulled into the lot that same afternoon in a BMW that purred like a very expensive cat, interrupting Wade's fourth attempt to explain how a clutch actually works. The woman, whose name was Margaret, had been doing surprisingly well for somebody who hadn't touched a bike in 28 years. She listened. She asked good questions. She didn't pretend to understand things she didn't, which in Wade's experience put her ahead of about 90% of the people he'd ever tried to teach. But the second that car door slammed and Royce came striding across the dust in a charcoal suit and barely contained fury, Margaret's hands started shaking on the handlebars so bad she had to let go. Royce was 45 and looked like he'd been born wearing a tie. 6 feet, thin in the way of men who do hot yoga and count macros like a religion. Hair styled with product that probably cost more than Wade's monthly electric bill. The kind of tan that comes from golf courses, not work. "Mom, what the hell are you doing here? I've been calling for 3 hours. Margaret's chin came up. Wade recognized the gesture, the moment a person decides whether to back down or stand their ground. She chose ground. Learning to ride, like your father taught me. Dad's been dead for 28 years, and you're 79. Royce stopped. Finally seemed to see Wade. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" Wade took his time. He'd dealt with men like this before. Rich men who'd never had to fight for a single thing because money smoothed every rough edge. "Wade Coleman. I sold your mother a motorcycle." Royce's face went red from his collar to his hairline. "You sold." He spun back to Margaret. "We've talked about this. The doctor said you're not capable of making these decisions anymore. You can't go around buying motorcycles from strangers. I can do whatever I want with my own money. It's not about the money. It's about your safety. You have Alzheimer's." The doctor confirmed it. "The court date's in 10 days, and the judge is going to grant me conservatorship because it's the right thing to do." His voice softened into something practiced. "Mom, please, I'm your son. Let me help you. By putting me in a home and selling the ranch." His jaw clenched hard enough that Wade saw the muscle jump. "It's $3 million. That's security. That's the best care money can buy for however many years you have left. That ranch is your father's legacy. 4 generations. Your father died in the desert protecting this country, and you want to bulldoze his family's home and put up condos for weekend executives." Royce turned to Wade, and every shred of concerned son pretense dropped off his face. "How much did she pay you?" $40. Royce laughed, ugly and jagged. "You sold a Harley to a woman with diagnosed dementia for $40. That's textbook elder abuse. Financial exploitation. I could have you arrested with one phone call." Wade took a single step forward, not aggressive. Just enough to make Royce aware that Wade was 6'2" and 220 pounds, and had spent 45 years in a world where problems didn't get solved with phone calls to lawyers. "Your mother doesn't have dementia," Wade said, quiet and even. "She remembers her husband's service number. She remembers every man in his platoon. She remembers the exact minute she got the call. He was dead. She remembers more clearly than you do, counselor, so either your doctor's incompetent or he's lying. Which is it?" For just a second, Royce's mask slipped, and Wade saw something underneath it. Something scared. Then the BMW's door slammed, and he was gone in a cloud of dust, already on his phone, already talking to someone in the urgent tones of a man whose plans just got threatened. Margaret sagged against the panhead like all the strength had drained out of her legs. Wade caught her elbow. "That's my son," she whispered. "I raised him alone after David died. Worked 3 jobs to put him through college. I was so proud when he passed the bar." She shook her head. "He was a good boy. He loved his father. When David died, Royce was 12. And his whole world ended. I thought he'd follow his father into the Marines. Instead, he ran the opposite direction, as far from dog tags as he could get. And somewhere along the way, he forgot everything David stood for." "You really think the diagnosis is fake?" "I know it is." "Then we go to war," Wade said. "But we do it right." That night, Wade made calls. He started with an old club brother, a man pushing 72 whose hands could rebuild an engine blindfolded in the dark. A man who remembered when the patch meant something more than leather and weekend rides. When Wade said he needed the Brotherhood, the man asked how many. All of them who still remember what the patch means. Wade said, "It's a widow. A Marine's widow. Her husband died in Desert Storm, same day as my father. Her son is trying to steal everything that Marine died to protect. We've got 9 days. The silence on the line lasted a long beat. Then, that's all you had to say. I'll have 15 men in your garage tomorrow night. Good men, the kind who remember. But 15 angry bikers can't beat a fraudulent medical diagnosis. What they needed was proof. So the next morning, Wade drove Margaret out to a cabin in the woods, to a retired doctor, an old friend who'd been a Navy corpsman in Desert Storm, patching up Marines under fire. A man who'd seen things that made sleep hard even 30 years later. Wade trusted him completely. The evaluation took 2 hours. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, questions designed to expose the smallest crack of confusion. Wade sat in the cabin's main room drinking coffee that tasted like tree bark, listening to Margaret's steady, clear voice answering every single question with perfect accuracy. When they came out, the doctor poured himself a cup and led Wade onto the porch. "She's sharp as a tack," he said quietly. "Sharper than me, probably. No cognitive decline. No memory loss. No confusion. Whatever that city doctor diagnosed her with, it isn't Alzheimer's. It isn't even normal forgetfulness. That woman could pass a pilot's exam. So, it's fake. Based on what I just saw, fake as a $3 bill." But then his face darkened, and he asked to see the doctor's name. When Wade showed him the photo from the medical board website, the old corpsman went still. "I know him. Medical conference, years back. I heard him at the hotel bar bragging to another doctor about how much money there was in guardianship cases. How families would pay anything for an official diagnosis that let them take control of a difficult parent's assets. He was laughing about it. His voice went hard. You don't go into medicine to rob people. And that was the moment this stopped being about one widow and one ranch. Because if that doctor would do it for Margaret, how many others had he done it for? Here's the cruel part, though. The doctor could testify, but lawyers with money would shred his credibility on the stand. They'd call him a burned-out quack living in the woods. The real proof, the medical records, the test results, the truth, was locked inside that doctor's office, protected by privacy laws. Requesting them legally would take 30 days. The hearing was in 9. Every legal road they tried, the system protected the man with money and credentials and left the widow to get crushed under timelines and rules written by people who'd never had to fight for anything in their lives. There was exactly one way to get the truth in time. And it was a felony. Wade thought about it for a long, hard night, sitting on his porch with a beer he didn't drink, watching the stars wheel overhead and thinking about his father. Earl Coleman, who'd kept his promises even when keeping them killed him. And then, before he could lose his nerve, he read the sealed letter. Margaret handed it to him out on a mountain overlook the next afternoon, after a lesson, before everything went dangerous. 33 years that envelope had waited. He broke the seal like he was breaking something sacred, and unfolded the paper. David Mercer's handwriting was neat and precise, even in a war zone. The letter was dated 2 days before he died. To the son of Earl Coleman. If you're reading this, your father and I didn't make it home. I'm sorrier than you can know. Your father talked about you every single night, how proud he was, how much he wanted to get home and teach you everything about engines and honor and being a man worth knowing. We made a promise, your father and I, the night before we deployed. If one of us didn't come home, the survivor would take care of the other's family. But if you're reading this, we both failed. We're both gone. So I'm asking you, begging you, to do what we couldn't. Take care of my wife, take care of my son, who will be born 3 months after I die and who I'll never meet. Make sure they know their Marine came home, even if it wasn't the Marine they expected. And then the part that broke Wade in half. On February 10th, we're scheduled for a recon mission near the border. If something goes wrong, I want you to know. I stepped on a mine. I felt it click under my boot. I knew I was dead. Your father was 20 feet ahead. He could have kept walking. He should have saved himself. Instead, he turned around and came back, tried to find a way to get me off that mine without setting it off. He knew it would probably kill us both. He did it anyway. Because that's who Earl Coleman was. A man who kept his word even when keeping it meant dying. I hope you're like him. Wade read it 3 times. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't quite crying. All these years he'd believed his father died in a random accident. Bad luck. But Earl hadn't been unlucky. He'd chosen it. He'd chosen to die trying to save his friend. And all those years Wade had carried guilt for not following his father into the uniform. But Earl had never needed Wade to follow him. He'd only needed Wade to understand what mattered, what was worth dying for, what a promise meant. So 3 nights later, Wade Coleman broke into a doctor's office in the city. He won't tell you the details of how. An old contact looped the security cameras. A cleaning supervisor who owed somebody a gambling debt lent a key card and asked no questions. A 30-minute window. Wade picked the office lock in 45 seconds, rusty hands and all, and sat down at the desk of a man who'd never worried about money a day in his life, and started searching. The diagnosis was right there. Official looking. Too official. Too perfect, like someone had taken a template and filled in the blanks. So Wade kept looking. And in a hidden subfolder, he found it, a spreadsheet that made his blood run cold. 23 names, 23 elderly patients, each with a diagnosis, each with a date, each with a dollar amount, $50,000, $100,000, $150,000, payment for fabricated diagnoses. And Royce Mercer's name appeared next to 19 of them as the appointed conservator. 19 families, 19 elderly people diagnosed with diseases they didn't have, then robbed blind by their own children, with that doctor's help. Then the emails. Royce and the doctor, discussing patients, discussing fees, discussing how to structure things to avoid suspicion. One from 3 months back stopped Wade's heart. The doctor confirming the evaluation of Royce's mother was complete. Diagnosis attached per your specifications. Standard fee of $75,000 plus 5% of the property value upon sale. And Royce's reply, the development company was offering $3.1 million. The 5% came to $155,000. Court date set. The judge should be straightforward given our previous successes with her. Previous successes with her. The judge was in on it too. And 1 folder more. Corporate documents. The doctor wasn't just being paid to fake diagnoses. He was a silent partner in the development company itself. Every property Royce sold made him richer. It wasn't fraud. It was a machine. Built to find vulnerable old people, fabricate their incompetence, steal their land, and profit from the wreckage. Wade photographed every page. And then he heard voices in the hallway. Security. Early. He smashed the window, climbed out onto the fire escape as the office door opened, jumped the last 8 feet to the alley on 68-year-old knees, and ran while the siren started to wail behind him. He didn't breathe easy until the city was 2 hours behind him in the dark. He had the truth now, but he'd committed a felony to get it. The evidence couldn't be used in court because it was stolen, and the hearing was in 36 hours. So they did the only thing left to do. They made it impossible to ignore. The day of the hearing, the brother who'd answered Wade's first call delivered his number. Not 15 men. 97. He'd called every chapter in the region, explained what was happening, and 97 riders confirmed. Average age, 67. All of them veterans or sons of veterans. Even rival clubs, men who spent most of their lives hating each other, united for one morning, because this mattered more than any of that. At dawn, 97 Harleys fired up at once. The sound was like the world ending and being reborn in the same breath. They rode through the city in 2 perfect columns. No speeding, no showing off. Just 97 old men riding to war. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared. Cars pulled over. News helicopters appeared overhead. And when they rolled up to the federal courthouse and parked in formation, the crowd on the steps went absolutely silent. Royce was there, white-faced, flanked by lawyers in suits worth more than Wade's truck. The doctor stood beside him, confident, until he saw the bikes. Then the confidence drained right out of him. The judge appeared in the doorway, demanding to know the meaning of all this, and the club's disbarred lawyer brother stepped forward and calmly informed her, in front of every camera there, that her own husband sat on the board of the very development company that stood to buy the ranch if the conservatorship was granted. That she had a direct financial interest. That she should have recused herself the moment the case was filed. The crowd erupted. And then the brother opened a briefcase and held up the photographs. 23 victims. The emails. The financial records. He announced calmly that copies had already been turned over to the federal authorities. It was a bluff. But it was a beautiful one. And then Wade stepped forward and pulled out David Mercer's letter and held it up so every camera could see it. "My name is Wade Coleman," he said. "My father was Gunnery Sergeant Earl Coleman, United States Marine Corps. He died February 10, 1991, in Desert Storm, alongside Lieutenant David Mercer, this woman's husband. Before they deployed, they made a promise. If one didn't come home, the survivor would take care of the other's family. They both died. So I'm keeping that promise. 33 years late. And I'm here to tell you that this woman's son has been trying to rob his own mother with a fake diagnosis. That this doctor has helped him do it to 22 other families. And that you've been letting it happen because your husband profits when that company buys the stolen land." The cameras caught every word. This wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a trial in the open air, in front of the whole world. The judge looked at the cameras, at the reporters, at 97 silent bikers, at a crowd that had grown to hundreds. Her career was over, and everyone knew it. She turned to her bailiff and told him to get the authorities on the phone. She turned to Royce and the doctor and told them neither of them was leaving the building. She postponed the hearing indefinitely. And she denied the conservatorship. Margaret kept full control of her person and her property. Royce made it 4 steps toward the exit before 2 bailiffs grabbed him. Margaret closed her eyes and let the tears come at last. Wade walked up the steps and took her hand. "It's over," he said. "No," she said, smiling through it. "It's just beginning." The federal investigation moved fast. 23 families identified, $47 million in fraud. The judge resigned by that afternoon. Royce Mercer was convicted on 19 counts and sentenced to 18 years. The doctor lost his license and got 25. 14 others went down with them, including 2 more judges and a string of nursing home employees who'd kept victims drugged and compliant. 3 months later, Margaret stood on her ranch, 22 acres of pine and meadow, and a view that ran on forever, and announced to a crowd of 300 that the land would become a haven for veterans and their families. Free forever. A place where people who'd served could finally find some peace. Wade would help her run it. The crowd cheered. The bikes roared. It sounded like second chances. And that afternoon, for the first time, Margaret climbed onto her panhead, fully restored, perfect at last. Every bolt and wire set right by her own hands and Wade's. He climbed onto his own, and they rode. Not Route 66, not yet. That would come the next month, the full 2 weeks from Chicago to Los Angeles, the promise David made her 35 years ago finally kept. But that day, they just rode through the mountains. 2 panheads, 2 people keeping promises for 2 Marines who died before they could keep them themselves. And behind them, 97 Harleys followed. So here's what I keep coming back to, and I want you to sit with it for a second. We tend to write certain people off. The outlaw. The biker. The aging man with the scars and the leather and the past he won't talk about. We decide we know exactly what they are. And sometimes it turns out they're the only ones left who still understand that a promise doesn't expire. That family isn't always blood. That the right thing and the dangerous thing are sometimes the exact same thing, and you do it anyway. Earl Coleman turned around in a minefield and came back for his friend, knowing it would cost him everything, because that's who he was. And 33 years later, his son walked into a courthouse and risked the rest of his own life to finish what his father started. Better late, he figured, than never. So let me ask you this, and I genuinely want to hear it. What promise are you carrying that's come due? Who's waiting on something you said you'd do? Drop it in the comments, because I read every single one, and these are the stories that stay with me. And if this one moved you even a little, do me a favor and share it with somebody who needs the reminder that it's never too late to keep your word. Hit subscribe, because the next story I've got lined up will hit you even harder. And until then, remember what an old mechanic learned standing in a dusty garage with $40 in his hand. Some promises never die. They just wait, patient to steal, for the right person to come along and keep them.